Do you want to start now, and I'll just let anyone else in?
Yes, we might as well. I imagine that people will hop on board. We have more registered for tonight. But hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us. Sorry we're not in person tonight. I'm glad so many of you are here for the question and answer session. So for those of you who don't know me yet, I'm Margaret Miller, and I am the Director of College Counseling. I've been here for 6 years. I have a daughter in this class, Gussie Miller. I know lots of the girls know her. And I have another daughter who's a freshman this year. And tonight, our second counselor, Dr. Garrett, is with me. We're hoping that you had a chance to watch the video that we posted on the college counseling web pages last week. And if not, perhaps you had a chance to look through the college counseling handbook that the girls received in English class. I went into the classes and handed back their PSAT scores and also gave them red folders, which are full of all sorts of information and surveys. We'll talk a little bit more about some of what we gave them in the red folders, but we're both excited. I'm speaking for Dr. Gret as well. We're both really excited to start to work with this class. It's a great class. I feel like I know the girls better because I've heard about them from my daughter now for the past 2.5 years, and they're so talented and so smart, and it's going to be a great year that we have ahead of us. And we're hoping too that we don't have too many more Zoom events. I hope that we can be in person while we get back together in the fall. But before Dr. Garrett introduces herself, we're going to answer questions tonight that have been submitted already. But if you have some questions as we're speaking tonight, or if you didn't have a chance to submit them ahead of time, you can go into the chat, into the private chat, and just direct them to Dr. Garrett. And so I think we'll just get started. And Paula, I'll just let you introduce yourself.
Okay, great. Hi, everyone. I'm Paula Garrett. I have been working as a college counselor at St. Cecilia for the last 5 years. A couple years before that, I also volunteered in the college counseling office, helping to set up and run some of the college fairs that we had, the Catholic College Fair and the other larger college fair. I have 3 children, 2 of whom were St. Cecilia graduates. I had one that graduated, a daughter who graduated in 2014, and she's in graduate school in California right now, and another daughter that graduated in 2016, and she is in Arizona working with AmeriCorps right now. So I've gone through the college process personally with 3 children, and then with a lot of you all. So I guess with that, we'll go ahead. We had a lot of questions that were submitted, so we will go ahead and get started. I think one of the first questions that we had a number of people send in various permutations of is, what can I do now, junior year, to get ready? So I'll take that, Margaret, if that's okay. I'll just start since I'm talking. So you're going to start in earnest over the summer and the fall. Things are really going to ramp up, but there's a lot you can do right now during your junior year to help get yourself in a good position for your application process. So first and foremost, you need to continue to do as well as you can in your classes. Just study and try to get your transcript to look as good as possible. So that's first off. Second off, I know that your course selection will be coming up soon, and you want to try to challenge yourself with a good, rigorous curriculum. So all the classes at St. Cecilia are always considered rigorous. They're all college preparatory classes, so you're starting off on a really good foot, and you want to just challenge yourself with whatever you are able to. If that means an AP class or 2, that's wonderful. If not, that's fine too. Just the colleges will look at the difficulty of your curriculum, and so you want to make sure that you challenge yourself. Next, you can sign up and do some prep and start taking your standardized tests. So I know a lot of you have signed up for the standardized tests that we're offering at St. Cecilia next month, or no, March, 2 months from now. In the meantime, and we'll talk a little bit more about this coming up because there were a number of questions about the SAT and the ACT, but it's really important for you to prep and sign up and start taking those tests if you can. Next will be start to explore colleges. And this is going to be another big topic that we'll talk about coming up. But now's the time when you're not feeling the pressure of having to get your applications out. Now's the time to start exploring colleges. And we'll give you lots of ideas in one of the later questions about how you can do that. And then lastly, later on in this year, you can get ready to create and start filling out your Common App. And your Common App is the application that you're going to be able to send to lots of different schools. So you have one application and it's an online application. Everything about it is online, and that will be what you'll send to most of your colleges. There'll be a few that do not use the Common App. They'll use an application that's on their own website. But later on in April, I think it's April 28th, is that right, Margaret?
Yes.
April 28th, we're going to have a half-day workshop in school, and we're going to get you started on your Common App. We'll get you to get the account going, and we'll show you the different parts. You can get the beginning sections set up with your different demographics and your family members' information. And we'll also send you a kind of a worksheet that you can use to start filling out and keeping track of the different activities that you've been involved in. And so all of these things are things that you can start to do now. You can start to organize any awards you might have gotten. You can start thinking about the activities that you've done and just start putting all those kind of things in a folder. And later on this year, we'll get you started with actually starting to fill out your Common App. So the next question we had was, okay, that's what you can do this year. What can you do? What kinds of things can you do over the summer? So Margaret, would you like to take that one?
Yes, thanks, Paula. Let's start off by talking about the application in general. And I think it's a useful thing for the girls to consider their entire application as their story. Okay, so it's a form, and that's, kind of restrictive. You only have 10 activities, for instance, that you can put into your Common App. But when you think of every piece of it, whether it's your essay or the activities section in the Common App, if you think of it as your individual story, that helps you understand what the colleges are looking for. So in the activities section, you can check off what year you engaged in that activity. So some of the girls will start something in 9th grade, and it'll be an activity that they become more and more deeply involved in. Perhaps they become a leader in that area. But there's also the summers. So it's really, even before they get here at St. Cecilia in that summer before 9th grade, they're already considered 9th graders. They're already freshmen. And so last year, for instance, you were already juniors in the summer. So there's that space to fill out. And the summer can be a really, really nice time to tell your story in a better way than you do during the school year, because during the school year, you don't have a lot of choices with regard to the classes that you have to take. We have all those requirements. So you have to have your math 4 years, for instance, and we don't have a whole lot of electives outside of art because we are actually a fine art school. So the girls have to take the 2 full credits of art, and they need to take their wellness. So the summertime is a really wonderful time to explore something that they might be interested in. I spoke a bit about this with the girls when I popped into their English classes last week, but some of them tell me about really interesting trips they take in the summer. They might be engaged in an archaeological dig somewhere. One student was taking an anthropology class. They don't have to do an academic program. Some of those can be expensive. You know, it runs the gamut. Some of the girls will do governor's school in the summer. It can be a job too. It can be an internship. But I think that summers are overlooked in some ways when it comes to telling the story in the application. And if a girl also helps out with the expenses at home, that's part of her story. You know, so I told one of the colleges about a girl whose mother was a nurse who worked at night in last year's class, and she had 3 younger siblings, and she had to take care of them, and she had to do that in the summer too. So everything that they put in that activity section really can fit together. And that's one of the things that we'll start to work on. Dr. Grett mentioned that morning on April 28th when we start to fill out the activities. So we spend a lot of time on that. It's not haphazard, you know, it's not just casually, they just start listing everything that they've done in random order. We really try and make it very cohesive. So we have a list of summer programs that are up on the website. And of course, that's just a small fraction of the different programs that the girls can engage in. Some of them are for STEM, for engineering. Almost every university has something. This summer, of course, many of them have gone virtual, but in some ways it can be a benefit because that reduces the cost for many of the programs. So they don't have to pay for the room and board part of it. It's just a tuition. And some of them have even, you know, decreased the cost further or even made programs free that might have been pretty expensive in other years. So I'm really encouraging the girls right now, while some of these applications are due in the next couple of months, you know, some of them will be February and even into March or April. Some programs are on a rolling basis, to just start to think about the summer now before opportunities are gone. So to answer that question, so what sorts of things can I do over the summer? It can be a pre-college program. It can be a language immersion program. And then we also advise the girls, if they can, to visit colleges. I hope that more colleges will be opening up. Some of them never really closed down completely. Even when we were, you know, the beginning of the fall, some of the kids were still able to go on visits where they had to wear masks, of course, and the number of guests accompanying them would be restricted, maybe just one parent instead of siblings and both parents, for instance. But I would keep looking at the websites and see what they're doing with the visits as the colleges start to open up. And certainly in the fall, many, many colleges are already sending us notices that are saying, you know, we just want you to know ahead of time, next fall we are going to be in person. Because as you know, many schools went fully online, or all the classes were online, even though kids were in dorms and they weren't accepting visitors. So another benefit really in some ways of COVID is that there's not as much of an expectation for a visit. In the video, I talked a little bit about something called demonstrated interest. And one of the ways that a college gauges if a student is really interested in coming to their campus, you know, if they make that offer and they accept a student, how likely is the student to actually accept and come? That's a number that colleges really keep track of. It's something called their yield. So to go to a college campus for a visit is the best way of showing demonstrated interest, of course, because there's a lot of effort and expense. And you're not going to do that unless it's a college that you're really serious about. So it could be hard on the girls sometimes because they might be really interested in a school, but they might not be able to fit in that visit. The girls do get 2 visit days as juniors, and then as seniors, they get 3. But all the same, it's hard. You don't want to take off from school. So we would have students sometimes who were deferred, and then they would make the visit because the school counted demonstrated interest and get in the regular cycle. So the visit was really important, but now there's less of an expectation for that, and the colleges, as many of you already know, because I know that the girls are coming in here when we have virtual visits in the morning and telling me about events they're attending, that there's quite a bit online right now. So all you have to do is go to the college website. They're probably sending you emails from a lot of schools already, inviting you to different events. So this summer, we really suggest doing the virtual fairs and doing it, as many of the visits and student panels and that sort of thing, because that will really help you. You know, it's the second best thing to visiting in person, and you don't have to spend all of the money and time to do it. They're usually conveniently in the evening or on weekends. And then the other thing is to continue working on the Common App in the summer. So we'll get it started with the girls. April 28th was that date, and it's a school day, and the other kids will be taking the CLT. It's a classical learning test that the younger students are taking. But your class will have the time to meet with us and start to work on the application. But the girls will have to roll it over in the first week of August. So we'll keep reminding them so they can get it started, but then they have to roll it over when it goes active for their class. And our best advice is always to get that main Common App essay under their belts in the summer. So some of the girls will have to write what they refer to as supplemental apps. I mean, sorry, not apps, supplemental essays on their application. And when you get into the Common App and you put colleges in there, it's another useful thing about going on the Common App. You can see the extra questions that different colleges ask. And in a way, that's also gauging the demonstrated interest, because students tend not to put in the effort of writing extra essay if they're really not interested in a school. So if the girls can just get that main essay done in the summer, then that really frees them up to work on those little ones, and it becomes much more manageable. So possibly doing some programs, finding an interesting job, visiting colleges, and then working on that app. So that's to answer the question of what should they be doing in the summer.
I might also toss in, when you were talking about building the students' sort of interest in kind of building the story, I'm going to give a couple of examples of things that other students have done. We had a student in the past who was very interested in astronomy, and she had a telescope, and she made a little, I don't know, like little lessons for younger students. And actually, once we came back to school, she was able to coordinate with some middle or elementary school, Margaret.
I'm trying to think, actually, that student was at Christ the King, where my daughters went. And I think one was in middle school and one was in the lower grade. So I think both actually, Paula.
Right. So she took her little program that she developed, and that was a way that she could, and she took it to the younger kids and did little lectures for the kids and little demonstrations. And that was a way that she sort of showed her interest and showed how she was sharing her interest in developing her interest. We had another student who was very interested in civics and was thinking about maybe doing, going into the ROTC, and she organized some drives where they would collect different kinds of toiletries and put together little goodie baskets for veterans, which she delivered then on Veterans Day. So she, kind of reached out and did this, organized this drive for different personal products. So things that you can do to sort of show that you're interested in, and it shows some leadership, it shows service. So those were other things that could be done over the summer when you have a little bit more time.
Right. Yeah, those are good examples. Thanks. Because I know it's good to have concrete examples. You just have to get a bit creative with it. But the main thing is it has to be what what you're interested in. We're not trying to brand you, so to speak. We don't want you to do things just because that's going to help you get into college. You really want to do the things that come from your heart, and then just take your own interests deeper as you're going through high school here. And you just step up more with the different clubs that you're in. And sometimes you can think of something and you can't get it done in the sort of restrictions of the school day and the school year. You can go off on your own. You can expand like that student did. I think that's a great example. Thank you for mentioning that one.
Okay, great. Okay, Margaret, a couple of people asked, what kinds of things do colleges look for in an application? Like, what are the pieces that need to be included in the application?
Okay. I always tell the girls that their transcript is the heart of any application, because the college, of course, it's the admissions is about determining first and foremost, is this student going to succeed on our campus? And so every college will have a different mission, but all of them want to make sure that the girl will succeed academically first and foremost. So they're looking, like Dr. Garrett said a little bit earlier, what are you supposed to be doing in junior year? Just keep getting those good grades. And right now the girls are choosing their courses. So what the colleges are always telling us is, tell the students to challenge themselves, but not overwhelm themselves. So this can be a little bit difficult to gauge sometimes. For some students, if it's the first time that they're stepping up to take an AP class, you want to make sure that it's not going to be too much homework, especially if they're juggling a lot of extracurricular activities and sports practices. So you really want to be honest with yourselves, girls. You're better off to excel in a standard level college prep class than to get a C in a class that's maybe a little bit too challenging. But if you feel like you work hard and you get a B or an A in that class, then it's a good thing to step up to that challenge. It depends upon the college. Each school will have different levels of selectivity. Of course, there are the Ivy League schools, the Ivy Plus schools that have become what we call hyper selective. So those kinds of schools are going to be looking for many AP classes, in some cases for students even to accelerate beyond the high school curriculum. So that's at the super highest level. And then other schools, as long as you do well with your standard curriculum and you're taking a number of core classes, one of the things that we see sometimes is that seniors want to take it easy so they don't sign up for as many of their core classes. Of course, English and math, you have to take your 4 years, but science and language, you might only have to take the 3 years to meet the requirements for degree. But the colleges like to see you, well, take it that 4th year, step up and take that AP Spanish class. It might be hard, but it certainly is impressive for colleges when they see that. And that's what they're looking for. They want to see that in that senior year, you're really stepping up so that you're ready for college. And when you have that AP designation, of course, it's supposed to be the equivalent of at least a semester of college. So whatever it is that your teachers are recommending you for, the teachers are giving it a lot of thought. They're looking at your performance up until that point. And so they understand this principle of, the girls should challenge themselves, but not overwhelm. So the transcript is at the heart. And then when they're reading the application, like we said earlier, most of the girls will fill out a Common App or an application that's very similar, but they're given 10 spaces to list different activities. And so the colleges like to see leadership versus membership in a lot of different things. So it's pretty easy here at St. Cecilia. I know when the girls start in freshman year, they go into the auditorium and they hear from different club officers about all the different activities that we have here, and they can get excited and join lots and lots of different clubs. But the thing is that now by your junior year, you want to really go more in depth in 2 or 3 areas. So it could be some community service, it could be an interest, maybe it's the French is the thing that you're most interested in, so you join French club. You might do our Veritas exchange program this year if it's running. We're still unsure about that, for instance. Or you could join the Alliance Française off campus. You can watch French movies. You can have a project within that club. So you just take on more and more leadership and go deeper with whatever it is that is your interest versus this idea of going to many, many meetings in lots of different areas, but not really focusing and contributing. So a word that we see a lot is impact. So colleges will ask a student to write a little essay. So what is the extracurricular activity that you engaged in that meant the most to you or that had the most impact in your community? So that's really what we're looking for, is that sort of depth and that impact that the student makes. And when we write our letters of recommendation or we fill out reports for the colleges, they ask us as counselors those kinds of questions, like what kind of impact does that student have in your community? Or what kind of impact sometimes do the students have in the wider Nashville community, especially with service work? So St. Cecilia girls, we have the requirement, but many of them go above and beyond that. So those are the kinds of things the colleges are looking at. They're looking at the transcript, they're looking at the courses that you choose. So they'll see your senior courses, even if you apply early and you only have the grades from junior year, they will see which courses the girls have selected for senior year. And then sometimes we'll send a report in the first quarter. That just depends on the school if they want it or not. So it's this full picture. It's what the colleges tend to call holistic review. So it's not just your numbers, it's not just your GPA, although that's important. It's not just your test scores, although we'll find that, you know, some scholarships are associated with an index with the numbers, but it really tends to be much more about the bigger picture of who the girl is and what she's engaged in, what she cares about. You know, that's a thing that's really important that can come through in an application. So if the college is asking for an essay about something that you care about, and it really isn't something that you have a deep interest in or you feel committed to, it's hard to write a good essay about that. You know, it really, that real enthusiasm that the girls can have for something that they care about will come through. So that's what we're always telling them, you know, whatever it is that you're interested in, that's what you need to engage in. Don't try and figure out, well, what do the colleges want? You know, do that reflection. And here, I think at St. Cecilia, it's a great environment for the girls to discern what they care about, what their gifts are, what they're good at. You know, the smaller all girls, it provides a lot of opportunities for the leadership, because we really, you know, have quite a few clubs. A school might be twice our size and have about the same number of clubs. They all need the same officers. So we don't have too much of a problem. It's really the opposite. Usually we're trying to squeeze everything in to that Common App and abbreviate things. So the girls here do well. So it's just a matter of getting it into the application and finessing it so it's cohesive and tells the girl's story. So I I could go on, but I think that, I hope, answers the question.
Thank you. Okay, so we had quite a few questions about standardized testing and testing accommodations. So I think, well, I put them all together in a category, and I'll go ahead and take this one. So first question that came out was, do I need to take both the SAT and the ACT? So colleges will accept either one. However, we do encourage you to take, at the very least, take what's known as a diagnostic of each one. So if you're not able to go and sit for the official test, you can do what's called a diagnostic, which is a full-length test at home under timed conditions. So you sort of simulate what you would be experiencing when you're at the test. So you get up in the morning early, you get there, you start at the time that you're supposed to start, and you time yourself and you do all the pieces. They have free full-length tests available on the SAT website. They have full-length tests available on the ACT website. You can also get ACT or SAT books that have full-length written tests. You also have some places like the Learning Lab will offer a proctored test. And so you can actually, and they're usually fairly inexpensive. I know a few years ago they were like $10, so they could be, I don't know, up to maybe $25 or so. But that way we have, in the college counseling office, we have charts that are what they call concordance tables, and it shows us what, like if you get this score on the SAT, it would be equivalent to this score on the ACT. So when you practice both, or when you give yourself an assessment on both, we can get a sort of a sense of if one or the other test is going to be a better test for you. They are similar, but there are some differences between the two. And so we do encourage you to do that. And once you come to us and we look at our concordance table and recommend which one might be the better test for you, then that would be the test that you would continue on with. So we also had a question, do I really need to prep for the SAT and ACT? And the answer is absolutely, absolutely. You need to prep for these. We have seen students have huge jumps in their scores, many points. Like on the SAT, we had a student that did some prepping and she jumped 240 points, which is a large amount on the out of a total of 1,600. We encourage you to start prepping right now. And it's because it's not something you can just kind of cram for at the last minute and just go in and expect you'll do well. It's really the kind of thing that you need more long-term sustained practice. So for example, for those of you who are planning to take the in-school test in March, if you start practicing right now and practice diligently, you will have what, about 9, maybe 10 weeks that you can actually do a lot of practicing, and it really, really does make a difference. We gave you a test prep list in your red folder. Some students like to practice at home, either with a book that they've bought and just do written practice. Some students, there's some excellent practice resources that are free on the SAT and the ACT website. The SAT is affiliated with Khan Academy for their SAT prep, and then the ACT has something called ACT Academy. And those we've seen kids, my own son is like a poster child for this. His score jumped many points with just that diligent in-home practice. Some students like to take either a group class at a prep center, or they like to have a tutor, and they feel like they are just maybe not the kind of person that is going to be able to do it on their own, so they like to get a test prep tutor. Those can be a little bit pricey. Some students like to do kind of a combination of things. They do some practicing at home, and then they'll meet with a tutor to give them kind of remediation in areas that maybe they didn't understand as well in their individual prep. So we definitely, definitely encourage you to start prepping and continue to prep. Another question was, when should I be taking the tests? So you should be starting now and taking them in the spring. They do offer an SAT and an ACT over the summer. And then, so some students, that's a great time for some students because they're able to, they don't have all of the conflicting activities if you're playing a sport, and that takes a lot of your time and it's hard to do any prepping. It's sometimes the summer students can really hit it hard and practice. Typically, our students will take these tests, what would you say, Margaret, 3 to 5 times?
No, that's about right. I think if a girl zeroes in on one particular test pretty early on, it might be 3. You know, we sometimes see a student take it twice. you know, she's been practicing a lot before she takes it, and she can get her gold score twice. But more often we see students who have taken a couple times and then they come back and they just take it one last time right before the applications are due. And sometimes they can get a nice little jump there in the fall, usually in October. And that's really just because by the time we get to October, they've just been taking so many tests already and practice tests that it all kind of comes together. But I just wanted to pop in, Dr. Garrett, there's one question in the chat which you may have seen about the question of test optional and how do families find out which school, you know, versus going to every single website for every college. Maybe you can talk a little
that'll
bit.
be one of the, that is one of the
next question, fair test.
Which is good. I don't see the, for some reason, it's not on my.
So it's just asking, is there an updated list of schools that are test optional?
Yes. So let me explain first to everyone what test optional is, and then yes, there is an updated list. So I'll tell you about that in just a second. But test optional is when schools will allow students to submit their test scores if they feel that their test score will enhance their whole package, their whole application package, and to not submit it, to choose to not submit it if they don't feel that way. This year, so there were many schools that were test optional prior to COVID, and with the difficulties that many students have had in actually being able to sit for some of these tests, a lot more, almost all the schools for this current year and many for this fall that you all will be applying to have decided to continue to go test optional, to allow the kids to submit or not to submit. The one thing that we want to make you aware of is that, and this is kind of very school by school, but for some schools, they will be test optional for admission purposes, but you may not be eligible for, in some cases, any merit aid. In some cases, you're eligible for merit aid, but they might cap it. There might be a ceiling, and you are not eligible for as much merit aid scholarships as you would be if you submitted a score. So that's just something that, as you start to look, you know, we can help you consider whether or not your score is, you know, you might have a score that you submit to some schools and not to others, depending on their situations. And the website, I don't know, for some reason, the chat is off my,
The chat
the website is called fairtest.org, fairtest.org. And that is a list, that is a current list, and they keep it pretty current of all of the schools that are test optional. Another thing that's known, a little bit interesting pertaining to the testing, is what's known as super scoring. And super scoring is where if you take the test 2 or more times, the school will combine the highest portion that you got on any piece of the test from different test sessions and give you like the highest possible score that you are eligible for. Not all schools super score. Some schools do UTK super scores, but other schools in state, UTC does not, right? So
right. It's very hard to keep track of that.
It's hard to keep track of it, and it changes.
Schools change from year to year, so we can't just assume that it will be the same for your class as it is currently for seniors. Right. So yeah, policies are a moving target when it comes to testing, and especially for your class, we'll be watching. Some of the schools have gone, like Dr. Garrett said, you know, they went ahead and said, oh, we're going to do this for 3 years, and we're going to see how this goes, versus, you know, just doing it, changing everything for 1 year and then pulling back again. So yeah, but we talk a lot about that. I think the number of schools that a student applies to is something that we want to be careful. Sometimes students can go a little overboard, and it can be easy with a Common App, but the part that can get unwieldy when students apply to too many schools, I think, is that testing piece. Because then we're having to look at every single school and decide, okay, are the scores that I have the right ones to send? I went through that exercise with one girl. You know, she had an array of schools, and you know, the scores were excellent for some schools, and then there was one school where we said, you know, her chances of the scholarship and admission were better without it. So yeah, the testing, we really are very careful and intentional and have a lot of discussions about that. But that all happens in the senior year when the girls come back and we do an update and we finalize that list. So at this stage, we really just advise the girls to give it their very best effort and try and work as hard as they can, get the best scores that they can, and then we'll see what happens. You know, like not to stress about it, because really there are quite a few wonderful, great, good, you know, excellent schools, which were test optional before. I think there were almost 1,000, Paula. Is that what you remember? Unfair test even before COVID?
There was about 900 before COVID, and now
Yeah,
many
so,
more.
but at the same time, then, you know, you say, well, if there are 900 schools and now there are all these, you know, why bother? Because it's such a, you know, really for most people, the onerous part, it's a real hurdle or obstacle to overcome. So why bother if so many schools are test optional? So, you know, we're just trying to make sure the girls have as many options as they can, and to not close any doors at this early stage of the process. So a girl may end up going test optional to all of her schools when we get to senior year, but we don't see that too often. What we really see more of is students applying to a wider array, casting a wider net, and then, you know, for some schools it's her reach school, and then for other schools she's turning in test scores and getting bigger scholarships. So the financial piece of this has become so much more significant, and I think, you know, personally, I think of test scores almost like just making bank. It's like money. So if you put effort into this, you're just going to get some of that money back. And so sometimes if the test prep, it can be a little bit steep, but if you look at some of these scholarship grids at a school like University of Georgia, for instance, I've used this example a couple times. A few years ago, we worked with a student, and she took an SAT and she was just 50 points away from the next level of scholarship. And she went in, she hadn't even signed up for tests. She had to go on the standby, and she showed up at 6:30 in the morning. She got in there and she took it, and she got those 50 points, and that really turned out to be $20,000 because she got 5,000 extra times 4 years from her school. So she was already into the school, but they gave her a window of time to improve her test scores and get this higher level scholarship. So, you know, it doesn't always work exactly that way, but I think the girls have to think of it as possibly working out that way. So just give it their best effort, without getting stressed about it, you know, because if that's not a strength, because it isn't a strength for everyone, it is to some extent a skill in learning how to crack the code of a specific test. And I said this to the girls when I went to their English classes, so I don't want to repeat myself too much, but it really is a kind of a skill, and they can improve it. But if that's something that's not a strength, you know, we'll figure out what's best for each individual girl. And there are scholarships for students even when they go test optional at certain schools. And, you know, it's all part of a kind of a, I don't know if strategy is the right word, but we have the big picture in mind. And so I think for families at this stage, for everybody, everyone's watching the costs and trying to figure out the way to get the most scholarships possible. It's really the colleges. If we did a pie chart, and we do this in our financial aid night, is it something like 70%? Do you remember, Paula? I don't have that in front of me. You're shaking your head. Yes. Yeah. So something like 70% of the money that the students get to go to college will come from the colleges themselves. It's those institutional funds. So we do have students apply to outside scholarships, and they can be successful in getting those, but they tend to be much smaller amounts. And they can be really helpful to pay for books and some personal expenses and that sort of thing. But the scholarships that really determine whether or not a student or family can afford a college tend to be the scholarships that come from the schools themselves. Mm-hmm. So the test scores, it's something they like. It's a little bit complex if you study higher ed, the landscape of higher ed, but things really changed. It goes way back now in the 80s when they started to do the rankings, especially the US News and World Report, because one of the numbers in the 7-number formula relates to their test scores. And so for colleges, you know, it's something that they want from the students to increase their own standing. It's not that they think that that student can't perform well or succeed in the college, so thus the test optional. So they'd rather let a student in and then not take a score that's lower than their average. But I don't want to get into too many complicated details with that. But if you're wondering why in this world of test optional that we're still talking about tests and encouraging you to keep at it.
And we had a question about scholarships, and we had a number in the chat here, and we had a number of other questions about that. So we will get to that question in a minute. There's just a couple more questions about testing, and then we'll move on to the next thing. I'll make this really quick. One thing that Mrs. Miller had gone into your classes, and I think she had mentioned to all of you something about the SAT subject tests, and that was something that was another option that's available to you to show sort of a proficiency, a strength in a certain subject area, like it could be math, it could be a language. And we just got big news this week that, and this is all part of the SAT, and they have terminated their SAT subject tests. So on page 13 of the handbook, you will see something about these SAT subject tests, and you can now just disregard those. So I just wanted to point that out. I won't belabor it because I know we've got a lot of other questions here and we're running out of time. And one last question that came from with regard to the testing has to do with accommodations. So how do I request accommodations? And if I have already started doing this, how do I know where my daughter is in the process? So we have a learning specialist who is Mrs. Mary Martini, and she is the person who handles all of the requests for accommodations. She assists you, and in many cases, actually, she needs to submit paperwork on the student's behalf. And so we have detailed information about how to go about if you are a student who receives accommodations for, maybe you already get extended time or some other kinds of accommodations. If you look in your handbook on pages 14 and 15, we have lots of detailed information about how you need to go about this process of requesting these for the SAT or ACT. And it does take a bit of time. So if you are someone who wants to do this, please reach out to Mrs. Martini. Her information is in the handbook on pages 14 and 15. I'll put it in the chat so that you can see it, but that would be how you could find out either if you've already started this, where you are in this process, and if you haven't started it and you believe that you need this, how you can put in an application for this. So I want to move on because we have a lot still to cover and we're running out of time. But okay, Margaret, help. How do I start making a list of schools to apply to?
Okay, yeah, that's the question that's in every girl's mind right now, and that's a tough thing to do. And I always use the word process with this. We talk about the college process because you can't just sit down like a homework assignment and all of a sudden whip out a list of 20 schools, which we're telling you, come up with 20 schools, your big list. Now, we, on the other hand, as counselors, can help you with that. That's sort of our expertise. The more you tell us about yourselves in that junior survey that we put in the red folders, or you can also find a version of it on Naviance, the more that we can help you find schools that would be a good fit for you. So that's not something that we're expecting you all to just do on your own and have when you come to the meetings with us. So that's really going to be probably the main task that we want to accomplish in these individual meetings that I'll be having many of them in the next week or two here. And so don't worry, so girls, don't worry. But again, back to the question of like, how do you do it? So you start with that self-reflection. So in the red folders, we gave you a few different surveys. One that I really like a lot is the college campus culture quiz, because all of these campuses have, they have their own vibe, basically. You could call it their own culture. And you want to figure out what kind of a college culture is good for you. So that one divides students up into students that are maybe more interested in a kind of pre-professional campus. Those are the gold schools. And then other students might be the sort that like to stay up far into the night and having debate about philosophical topics with their friends, or like to go to art exhibits and that kind of thing, a more sort of intellectual, artsy kind of a student. And so that's what we spend a lot of time doing, is either visiting when we can in non-COVID years, or going online ourselves, or reading or talking to other counselors, like what's the vibe at that campus? What kind of student is the right student to thrive? It's this idea of fit. A lot of times when we have these college reps that come, and as younger students, I'm sure you've seen many of them in the front of the building, that's the question I always ask. So, what kind of student is a good fit student for your school? And some of them, they're big universities with lots of different departments, and many different types of students can do well and be happy in that setting. But that's what we're going after, and it's a bit of an art in some ways. It's, there's not a real formula to it. So these assessments that we've given you, that one I think is really good. And it'll tell you, okay, like the blue type of school or purple is good for you. And then we'll have in our minds, okay, that gives us some insight. So we can recommend some schools that fit that category. There's another one in there from a website called College Match by an expert. He's an independent consultant named Steve Antonoff, and for 30 or 40 years now, he's been looking at colleges and helping students figure out the fit, and he's very generous with his resources. So that's where that came from. It's a bit more extensive. I think it's actually 10 pages, but the questions are really focused a lot on what kind of a classroom setting is good for you. And when you spend the time completing that, we can look at it together. And that's another tool that can really give us some insight into what kind of a school should be on your list. And then it's, as I said, it's an art. And so sometimes parents, you might have attended a school, so your daughter will be a legacy and you want her to apply to that school or visit. It may or may not be the right match for her, but we can still put it on the list and she can do her research. So at this stage, we're just saying, go big, come up with 20, it could be even more schools. And then we start to go on the websites. I think websites are underused resources. I really enjoy going on the websites, and I especially like going into the department pages. So if it's a subject that you really like here, so I just met with a student yesterday who's very, very passionate about French, everything French, the food, the culture, the movies, novels. And so for her, we would just start to look at some of the schools on her list and see, well, what's going on in that French department? Like, yes, every school will have a French major, but is there a lot of engagement on that campus with students? Some schools will have these international houses. They'll have a French house. They'll have a mentor living there who's a native French speaker. They make meals together. They have a great study abroad program. So you have to dig a little bit And it's really a research job, essentially. So, to answer that question, that's a long answer. So how do you build a list? So you come and you talk to us. We're a good resource. You work on those assessments. The effort that you put into those, it'll help you reflect just by trying to answer those questions and help you figure out. And then when you go to a campus, when that time comes, we're hoping that we all get to do the in-person visits, that will also help you ask good questions. So on the campus, to the people that are doing the information session or giving you a tour, and even when they come virtually, then you have those questions because you've already been thinking about them. So so those are some of the ways, I think. I don't know, Dr. Grant, did you have any other suggestions to add for students coming up with a good list?
Well, there's a piece on Naviance called the College Super Match, and you can put in different criteria. You can put in location, major, size, student activities, selectivity, and based on that, the Naviance will pop up with a list of schools that might fit all those criteria. There's also on page 16 of your handbook, we have other search engine type things like that where you can put in a lot of criteria, and then at least that gives you something to start with. And then we have some really good resources. I think we both have this book here. It's called the Fisk Guide, which we really love. It's a book that the author presents a lot of subjectivity, but we find it to be pretty accurate in terms of you really get a sense of what the community is like, what the strengths and weaknesses of that school are. So you could come up with a list as a tentative list through the things that Mrs. Miller was saying, and then do some digging either on their websites or in some of these resources. We have some books that we really like that have just lists of all the schools that have different things. Like it might be all the schools that have a physics major, or all the schools that are located in certain Northeast city, or all the schools that are really work well for students that are shy. So between all of these resources, you can come up with a good sort of starting list, and then you have to do the really hard job, like Margaret was saying, of paring that down.
Right, yeah, and it depends. Like sometimes a student will be interested in something like linguistics, let's say, and there just aren't a lot of undergraduate institutes that have linguistics as a major. And so then that's going to automatically, narrow a list, which I don't necessarily recommend for students to get too narrow, because colleges tell us that students will change their major on average 3 times. So we don't like a student to choose or typically, go down that super narrow path at this stage. So yeah, that's one piece of advice, but it can be tricky if you get too big of a list. But I have found, you mentioned the Naviance, and also there's the college, the big future. I think that is actually pretty good. When I've worked with students and we put together a list, and then we go and try and see what comes up when you do the big future. I mean, the thing is, you still have to start with the assessments, because they'll ask you those questions. So you really want to think through those questions. If you haven't thought it through and you're checking off every single box, then the list that it spits out will be massive. It's not going to be as helpful as it could be. So really the self-reflection part and the visits, either virtual or in person, are really crucial. So Dr. Grutt, we're getting pretty close to the end of our hour.
I wonder if I could just really quickly touch on, because we had a couple questions about financial aid, and I think
okay, big and important.
Really important. I'll try to make it really fast, and of course we can stay on if anybody wants to stay on and ask any more questions, or feel free. But people were asking, how do I apply for financial aid? And financial aid includes 2 parts. It includes need-based aid, and it includes merit-based aid. So for the need-based aid, everyone is going to want to fill out a FAFSA application. And in the fall, all of this will go into much more detail in the fall. We'll have a financial aid night, and we will have a FAFSA night, a FAFSA workshop night. A FAFSA stands for Free Application for Federal Student Aid. And this is need-based aid. So if you will fill out your FAFSA in the fall on or after October 1st. And again, we will have lots of information in the fall to help you with that. Some schools also require a second financial aid assessment, which is called the CSS profile. But again, we'll get into more detail there later on. In our handbook, there's a list of scholarship search engines on page 24, and you can use that to look up different scholarships. We email students as we get information about local scholarships. We have scholarship list of scholarships that we can share. One final thing that's helpful is what's called a net price calculator, and every school is required to put this on their website. And if you go into this and fill this out, it will give you a rough idea of how much you would have to pay at that school. And the more questions that they ask you in this net price calculator, the more refined and the more precise or accurate the estimate they'll give you is. If they just ask you a few global questions, it's maybe not necessarily going to give you the best assessment. But our students do extremely well with getting merit-based aid. Again, as we were mentioning earlier, as Margaret mentioned earlier, much of it is awarded from the college, and much of that is just based on your application. Some colleges will have additional applications that you can fill out for additional merit aid, maybe for like service or maybe an art talent or something like that. But search engines, again, on page 24 can help. We will send out information, and then doing the FAFSA in the fall that's kind of a quick nutshell.
Yeah, I just want to say, Paul, if you don't mind, I just want to step in. I don't think parents should be waiting until the fall. I think you really should be with your daughters as they do the research and try and put together a good list. I think you need to look through that financial lens early. Families are waiting a little too long, and even when it comes to filling out that FAFSA, we'll tell families during financial aid night that make sure you go to the web pages, because some schools require that extra profile and some schools do not. And if you have to fill that out, it is much more searching. You're going to need to dig up much more of your financial information. There are some things that you can do closer to the end. If there's some big bills you need to pay them before you fill out the form, little tips like that. But I really do think that we can work hard to get kids into school sometimes, and then it turns out that this school is not an affordable school for that family, especially when families have students here, other daughters. You have more kids that are coming down the pike that are going to college, and college has become so expensive. And some of the scholarships, it's not just that you put in the application and then you get the merit aid award. Some of them are going to have a different avenue. Some are special awards. Some require additional essays. And as the girls organize themselves, they really need to have that mapped out ahead of time. Like, this is the one because the colleges, they're not going to give out money that easily. You have to show them that this is the one that you're interested in, you're putting in the effort, and you're a good match. Like, a lot of the times they want to give the money to the student because she's the match. She's the one that they want on the campus. She's the one that's going to bring something to them. It's very much of an exchange. It's not this one-sided situation, I guess is maybe not quite the right word. But parents, please, this idea of the net price calculator, it's just ballpark. but it's really something important to think about now and have a conversation in which, you know, you tell your daughters, this is what we're thinking. You don't have to get into details about salaries and assets and all of that, but just say, you know, ballpark, this is where we need to land financially to be able to afford the college. And some of this stuff we can't know till we get those award letters, but actually you can have a pretty good idea. You know, you can have, we have records too. We know, like, okay, so if a student is of this academic standing, we can kind of take a guess if she has a lot of leadership and she has good grades, like based on what happened last year, this is what she's likely to get in a package. So I'm sorry to step in and I don't mean to go over the time, but I just want parents to know it's not good to wait until we're actually applying and waiting for decisions, because it's just a little too compressed. This is something with the tools that are available now, and you know, you can call us and we have more information in the handbook, but just get it started. And you know, there's all sorts of data, like how much merit aid does the school tend to give out, how much need does the school tend to meet, or what schools are more generous when families don't actually need-based aid. So anyway, these are all things to just not to put off, because the earlier we are, the better the chances that we have success and that we help you find the schools where you'll get the money that you need for your daughter to attend.
So I think that's it for now. I know we kept you past your time, but we thank you all so much, and we're excited about this year, and thank you all for coming. And we'll stay on if anyone has any other questions that you'd like to ask. Feel free, and feel free to email us and or have your daughter ask. So.
And there's a parent survey also. The girls have a paper copy in their red folders, but there's also on Naviance, you have your codes in the red folder. So that's a good way to communicate with us too, if there are important things you want to make sure that we know before we meet your daughters in these next couple of months here, any concerns. And as Dr. Garrett said, you know, don't hesitate to call us, and we can always set up a Zoom meeting or a phone conference with you and answer any individual questions that you have. But thank you. And I know some of you have had daughters who have already graduated, so I look forward to working with you all again. And thank you for joining us tonight. We appreciate it. Hi. Hello. That's nice to see faces.
Thank you.
Okay. Good night.